Hello everybody, I'm Matt Rowe and welcome to episode 35 of the Zwift Power Up Cycling Podcast, joined once again by co-hosts Kristin Armstrong and Greg Henderson. How are you both doing?
Hey Matt, all good, very good, thanks.
Everything's good. Thanks for having me.
Good, glad to hear it. So what have you guys been up to the last week or two?
I've actually volunteered at the local high school here in Cambridge, and I'm helping relieve study break from 9 o'clock in the morning through till lunchtime, so just watching the guys study and helping them out with some questions they've got. So just helping out the local community really. It's been quite it's quite good getting to know some new faces, and it's given me a bit of time to carry on with my nutritional study, so it's a bit of a win-win situation.
Happy days. What subject are you looking after them in?
Well, they have a study period where they get to do whatever they're studying or whatever exams they have coming up. And if they've got any questions related to what I might be able to answer, I can help them that way. Yeah, it's a pretty relaxed environment. Some of them are just playing video games in their study period. Which fair play. But some of them are studying and some of them have genuine questions. So it's
cool.
It's good.
Nice one.
Christian, what have you been up to?
Yeah, so I just feel like I've been juggling a few things. It's kind of who I am. It's in my blood. But, I opened up a fitness center 2 months ago and just kind of all hands on deck, getting that going. Have another one opening up November 1st. So obviously focused on the business. But other than that, it's deep down race season for several of the athletes that I coach. So anywhere from Val di Sole mountain biking to Ride London to Pan American Championships in Lima. So definitely juggling some, obviously the World Championships are coming up and mountain biking and on the road. So it's important to really focus in on the fine tuning peak. And then just as a mom, my son just got into basically riding motorcycles, dirt biking, and I am just like
awesome.
Terrified. He loves to mountain bike, but he got on a dirt bike with his cousin this weekend, and well, that's what we're all going to be getting for his birthday. So you never know what's next.
Yeah. Wow. And you say you're coaching a rider who done Ride London. They weren't involved in the crash, were they?
Yes, actually they were. Emma White, she was involved in that crash at, right before the line. So it was really unfortunate, but luckily we always say that it's great because she walked away from it and just basically feels pretty beat up, just physiologically, and her body just, it hurts, and mentally you have to come up from that. And it's hard when you've trained so hard for that one day event. So it was unfortunate, but yeah, it sounded like it was an unnecessary crash.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never nice to see. And obviously there's crash in the men's as well. And obviously the speeds they're going, it's, you don't really appreciate it on TV. Both the men and women, they were certainly, 50, 55, if not 60k an hour crashes. And I was like, you're driving along a fairly busy road and imagine jumping out the window. That's kind of like the damage you're going to do. Now, when I explain to my non-cycling friends, like that's literally what it's like. Frightening. But obviously a few weeks back now, but I did the Sportif on the Sunday, so the Ride London Sportif with my wife Danny, which is awesome. The first time I've completed it, although I did start it a few years ago. Although I was a DNF, basically riding along with Danny, and we actually passed our hotel that we're staying in, and Danny had raced the night before, and she basically had obligations to go to the start and do a few media things, and then we literally passed our hotel about 8k in, and literally jumped over the barrier, went back to bed. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but then later, reflecting on it, it was like such a missed opportunity. It's one of those things kind of, felt like I should have ridden, and people apply and don't get in, so I took a place up there and didn't get to ride it. But this year did ride it. It was pretty epic. I mean, 25,000 people on the streets of London, certainly crazy. But that box hill, it really isn't as hard as people think. There's so much hype about it. It's got that fear factor just because it's famous. It's actually the world's most popular Strava segment. I think almost 500,000 people have rode up it last year. So people certainly love Box Hill, but I don't know if you guys have ridden up it, but I just didn't find it quite as hard as I was expecting.
Well, I raced the 2012 Olympics there, and when you're in your Olympic peloton, which is effectively a Pro Tour peloton, it's only 5 minutes. It's only a 5-minute climb. So, okay, the fact that we did it like 17 times, that's what made it hard. You're just a battle of attrition, really. But the actual climb in itself, and I mean, it's a lot of climbs are like that. You take the Poggio and the Suppressor in Milan San Remo. If you just go and ride those, they're not difficult either. It's just that you're doing them at the end of 270 kilometres. So, Box Hill, absolutely doable. But at the end of a long day, it's a tough one to get up.
Yeah, very good point, Greg. Very good point. Obviously, the approach, isn't it? But on a more sombre note, I think that the world of cycling lost a good person recently. Lotto Soudal Pro Bjorg Lambrecht crashed on the third stage of the Tour Poland and very sadly passed away. And Bjorg was part of the Zwift community. He's a level 19 Zwifter. And if you listen to what some of the other pros have said about him on Twitter and on social media, it was all so incredibly positive, just how nice a person he is, how friendly he is, happy, and obviously an outstanding athlete. Just, really sad news. So if you just take a moment's silence in memory of Bjorg. And on a more positive note, Fiona Kolbinger, a German lady, has become the first woman to win the Transcontinental. So that's a 4,000 kilometer event. It's a single stage where basically you just have to choose your own route, hit the 4 checkpoints along the way, resting, sleeping, eating, all that. You just do it whenever you like. And I read she only slept for 4 hours a day. But first female winner. Fair play.
So does that differ very much from the race across America? Do you get to choose your own path on the race across America? Because it's a similar distance, isn't it? 4,000, 5,000 kilometres. It's just absolutely epic.
Yeah, I would think that it would be basically how do you keep your body going and how do you fuel yourself? It's almost like a race of fueling over 10 days period. It took, I believe 10 days time.
I think Transcontinental is kind of you're on your own. It's kind of got to be self-supported. So basically you're carrying on your bike.
Okay.
Like a sleeping bag or whatever you need. Whereas Race Across America, people do it on time trial bikes and disc wheels and super aero. But it's very similar. Very, very, very similar. Both obviously ridiculously hard. But that's amazing. First female ever, and I think she's like 7 or 8 hours ahead of, or 300 kilometers ahead of second place.
That's impressive, isn't it? And it's those ultra endurance events where the female physiology really catches up and in this point overtakes the male physiology. They get very, very close in the Ironmen. The time differences from the time difference from a one-off marathon male to female, is quite substantial. But then if you add all three together, 180 bike riders, when the female physiology is better adapted for ultra endurance than what the muscular male physiology is. It's a really interesting concept.
Wow.
Yeah, and she's quite young. She's only 24.
I know what I was doing at 24 and it wasn't that.
But on there must be people who do Transcontinental who just misjudge the sleep. So she slept for 4 hours a day and fairly consistently. So she obviously had a strategy that she knew what worked for her. But there's bound to be people out there, day one sleep for 2 hours, and day two, get away with 2 hours. They're perhaps slightly ahead, but then just fall asleep. Come day four, you're just absolutely knackered. And as well, the team that must support, it's unsupported, isn't it? No, I was going to say there must be a massive support team on this, but I'm getting mixed up with Transcontinental now. God, how lonely must that be as well? That's a mind game.
So the Race Across America, I had a friend who just recently did support for a New Zealand guy, and they have a whole team that does rotation and following them. But the guy that planned the race strategy, he went on the winner's race strategy and only gave the rider an hour and a half sleep.
Oh.
And it just came, like you said, they get the sleeping wrong. It just came absolutely unglued. They had to peel him off the bike and just because he was only going like 11, 12 k's an hour, like barely moving forward. He was just dead. Yeah, and they just had to sleep him for 7 or 8 hours. He was just cooked. So they got the race plan completely wrong.
Yeah, savage. All right, guys. So on the last episode, we played you the first half of Greg's chat with Professor Jim Cotter on heat and humidity, all centered around the Olympic Games next year in Tokyo. Today, we bring you part 2 of that chat. So we're going to join where we left off on the last episode. Let's jump straight back in.
So, Professor Jim, what is your opinions on acclimatization? Are we doing it for Tokyo, or are we not doing it for Tokyo? What's the best?
I think we are, but it's how much and why and how we do it. I mean, they seem like such basic questions, but we really are short on that stuff. And I think the issue is that because Tokyo is so humid, and because your classic heat adaptation gives you eventually just, over a couple of weeks, increased sweating power. That's not necessarily what we want. We want some of the other things you get out of heat acclimation. And I think we don't necessarily want that because we may not be able to evaporate it. So that aspect could leave us worse than useless because we just dehydrate faster for no benefit. And that's if Tokyo really is that humid. And I haven't run those calculations, so I don't know. But for some people, they're not going to want to have to sweat more. It won't help them and it will potentially harm them.
The temperature today in Tokyo is 35 degrees and 83% humidity. That's just the temperature today.
Okay. I mean, what we have to figure out from that, and what each athlete would have to know, and they'd have to figure it out with their sports scientist. I'm not employed to do that. I don't know. But what they need to know is this is how much heat I produce. This is the vapor pressure gradient of the environment. And therefore, this is how fast it can absorb that, how it can remove that heat. And therefore, am I going to benefit from more sweating or not? Am I already sweating at that level? That if I sweat more, all I'm going to do is drip it. And therefore, do I want to sweat more or don't I? For how fast the heat I'm producing and what environment. And that is human. So I would suspect there'd be people already at, saturating water vapor pressures. They're not going to get a benefit from being able to sweat faster. And therefore, those aspects of heat acclimation aren't going to help. Other aspects will. They'll have a cooler core temperature and that will be relevant. But if you're racing for 6 hours, that's actually not going to help you much. But it all helps. So, but that can be killed by a warm-up. So, if I was going into that environment and I knew I had to be out there for, I don't know, people have to figure this out for themselves, but if you're out there for more than, let's say, half an hour, you can hit critical core temperature as well within half an hour. So I wouldn't be warming up. I'd be trying to prime the muscles with the shortest thing that allows them to use oxygen faster without getting tissues warmer.
Wow, we are really moving into a really dangerous territory. We've got like we mentioned before, we have got a really good chance of the winner of some events coming from just the person who's done the absolute correct research in regards to this heat and humidity.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a few things that, and we may want to run some of this again and chat about this again because they are quite interrelated issues and they're complicated issues. But for example, a warm up may be something you don't want to do. Obviously, if you're a high jumper, a long jumper, triple jumper, whatever, because you manage your heat in other ways. You can keep yourself cool between times and so forth. And you do want warm muscles that produce more power. That there's a little bit of a relationship there. And you're not under this heat stress. But if you're a triathlete, a marathon runner, walker, cyclist, whatever, you're in a completely different situation. So to get back, to the things like you do start cooler if you're heat acclimated. But as I say, you can nullify that depending how much you warm up, if you warm up and how long and so forth. The temperature of your drink, and there you're trading off, you don't want the ice cream headache, so you want the hydration if you're dehydrating quickly, but you may want the slushy beforehand to try and remove heat out of the body, and then you may want cool water at the temperature and palatability. You can, hydrate as fast as you can during the event.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, so we're definitely not 100% certain that we want to fully acclimatise. We just maybe only acclimatise to some degree.
Yeah. And it's you're trading off, for example, maybe you don't want the high sweat rate, but you need that maybe a little bit of extra sweating will help you. Well, you typically have that within 6 to 9 days anyway, but by, let's say, 14 to 21 days, you may have a lot more sweating capacity, and you don't want that necessarily. But what we don't know with humans yet is, let's say you heat acclimate for 6 months, you're just more efficient. Talked about this already, that might be the best of both worlds, but can you do that in a way that doesn't impair with your fitness development? So how do you periodize that in with your training? And it's now that we're within a year out, those things, got to have those sorted out really.
So just on the side note here, is ice cream headache, is that a scientific term?
No. I can't remember the scientific term, but there is one. It's I can find it if you like.
So what's actually happening? What's happening to me when I drink my my ice cream too fast or my milkshake too fast?
It'll be cold and ice makes a little difference. Same as with your gas reflex when you fall into cold water. It doesn't, once you get down to a level, it doesn't matter how much colder it is. You maximize that neural drive. And it's the same with
But an ice drink is much better than a cold drink for cooling your core.
Yeah.
I had another question for you, Prof, is when I'm sweating on the ergo doing my Zwift session and that sweat's dripping onto the ground, is that wasted?
Absolutely.
Wasted sweat?
Yeah, it's worse than not sweating it because it hasn't removed heat because it hasn't evaporated, and as you transform water into, liquid water into vapor, it removes, it's 2.5 kilojoules of energy per gram of sweat evaporated. It's an enormous heat loss.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Was it 2.5 kilojoules per gram of sweat?
Yeah, 2.4. So it's a lot, and it's about twice as much as the heat you actually lose if you melt ice. So if you drink a slushy and you melt the ice, you get pretty much half of that heat sunk into melting the ice. Then that comes into your bloodstream and goes eventually into your sweat glands, and then if you evaporate that, if that happened to be the same gram of water, you lose twice as much heat from evaporating it. So it's counted for you both ways. You've got, what is it? That's better than drinking water and just sinking a little bit into heat as you warm the heat up from 2 degrees up to 37, 38 degrees. You get a little bit of heat sink, but it's not much. But the important point is you kind of feel like you've got a lot, but in reality, you haven't got the benefit. So your perception versus your reality really uncoupled there.
That's really interesting. So I'm going to heat sink energy to melt the ice. So that's why drinking a slushy beforehand is better than just drinking some cold water.
Multiple times more effective, 3 times more effective. But you can't keep doing that during a race because you just can't get the volume in. So that's why you want a water at a temperature that will work.
There you go. That was my next question. So if I'm going to so then I have to aim on staying hydrated. So then do I just drink not freezing cold water, but just cool water to make it palatable, to make it actually tasty to drink?
Exactly. So whatever works for you and encourages you to drink more. And the key point is that the people who are heat acclimated need to drink more, and they're actually stimulated to drink more because it may not play out much in Tokyo because you're sweating so hard, but when if you sweat too hard, you saturate the reabsorption mechanisms in the sweat glands. But what your sweat glands are actually good at doing is pulling the salt back out of the sweat and leaving it in your body. So even though you leave a crustiness on your skin surface, that the amount of salt onto your skin surface is a lot less than what you leave in your body. So the more you sweat, the more your body becomes more and more concentrated with salt. And that stimulates you to drink more. So people who are heat acclimated actually will naturally drink more, and that's a good thing. But they also need to. But if they're dripping it, they're wasting it. It's not helping at all.
Yeah, that's a good question because that's always one of the people take photos of their ergo and their ergo sessions and things like that, and it's just a pool of sweat underneath them. It's like that's each drop, because that's in game on Zwift. There's how many sweat drops that you drop, and that accumulates over time, and you can earn prizes in Zwift with the sweat drops. But it's funny that that'll be directly proportional to how hard you're exercising. So the people who exercise the hardest will be dripping it faster than the people who are not. So it's straight out who's the fittest. Well, on average, they'll be sweating the most.
If you generate the heat, you've got to get rid of the heat. And that would help them in an outside environment, but in an inside environment, it won't help them so much.
Wow, that's interesting. So every drip of sweat is a wasted drop of sweat and a wasted drop for hydration.
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, you can't, for a cyclist more so than a runner, water is an amazing thing. Like, you can melt it, you can evaporate it. So we've just talked about those two benefits. But you can also sink a lot of thermal energy into it without it changing its temperature much. So people who have a lot more lean mass can sink more of their exercise heat into their body without increasing their body temperature so much, because more of them is made of more watery tissue, and therefore they can absorb that heat, without increasing their temperature so much. It's really cool. But of course, a runner, you've got to carry that weight as well, whereas a cyclist has to carry it less, or to less extent. It also helps in that respect. It increases your heat sink capacity, but it also increases your cardiovascular capacity. So you can carry more blood to the skin,
yes.
So you can help carry the heat there to offload it. So there's multiple reasons having the extra fluid on board is good. And people think about hydration status and the need to keep their hydration status up. What they sort of forget to realize is that people who are highly trained, and particularly highly trained and heat acclimated, have more fluid in their body. And that accounts for a lot. So it's all those mechanisms apart from the melting the ice. So there is, and for a lot of reasons, and it helps keep your cells bigger. And if you stop cells shrinking so much, they actually don't have to go to carbohydrate as a fuel so much. So there's all sorts of ramifications.
It's amazing how with physiology, everything is so interrelated. One thing is eventually going to affect another thing onto another thing that's one of the things I've learned is...
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so interrelated, the whole body, and it's all its mechanisms, they're all interrelated.
And that's why I find it intriguing that people might try and do altitude training or have a particular ergogenic aid, because you can show in certain situations it works, but when you put somebody into another situation, or for a fitter individual or something, and fitter individuals have tended to optimize across the board of their physiological systems, so it's not necessarily going to help them at all, even though they can point to plenty of evidence that, this mechanism works. So yeah, and the other thing, so the cyclists who are training inside and trying to break these records inside, and we sort of say, okay, they're sweating, they're wasting a lot of fluid, and that's not helping them in that performance, but we don't even know yet whether that's helping, hurting, or not even affecting the fitness development.
Being dehydrated, exercising in a dehydrated state.
Exactly. So, dehydration is always frowned upon, but, and I think sometimes with good reason, and more so for people who are not particularly fit, and more so in a hot environment, which is unfortunate because that's when you tend to dehydrate the most. But from a conditioning perspective, we don't really know yet whether you want to be allowing or trying to limit it. It's, we need more research in that sort of space. And even heat acclimation, we don't know the best way. Exercising in a controlled hot environment, which we call heat acclimation because it's artificial, or you go to a warm environment and train in that environment, that's heat acclimatization. They're largely the same thing. The adaptations are much for muchness. And it's up to athletes what they want to do. There's pros and cons for either. It's a more natural space to exercise outside in a nice natural heat, but maybe you go there and they're having a cold week. So you don't get the adaptation you were hoping for.
That can happen, can't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And whether we dial up the conditions for Tokyo and try and mimic the same situation, I personally don't think that's necessary. You just have to add heat. It's intriguing that with training, we sort of ramp it up, whereas when we heat acclimate, we just load it on in a square wave. Day one, here's the conditions, you're into it. We never do that with exercise training.
That's true.
So there's all those little subtleties around, do we want a humid environment? We don't even have enough research yet on hot versus dry. Hot dry versus warm wet. Warm wet's probably more effective, but, some heat's beneficial, and you can always create the humidity with clothing anyway. So, and we don't know, if I was going to exercise in a hot environment, I think it's good to go there. And do you sleep hot? No, I'd say no. sleep cool. Sleep is important, and don't do anything to compromise that.
Oh, that was one of the biggest mistakes I made. I remember I went to a tour of Malaysia, and one of my teammates, Danny Pate, I wouldn't let him turn the air conditioning on at night. I said, mate, we've got to acclimatise. We've got a week here before the race. We've got to acclimatise. So he was just hating me.
Yeah.
and then as soon as the race started, we just jammed the AC. It was so hot. We just needed to sleep. So, Professor Jim, I'm heading off to the Tokyo Olympics. I'm a 100-metre sprinter, I'm a marathon runner, and I am a road cyclist. What's the top 3 take-home tips that you would give me for each event?
The sprinters will love it. The marathon runners and the roadies less so. So the sprinter, basically, they're just acclimatizing for comfort, just so that they're happy in that environment. They're gonna do well, and they're just gonna manage heat. There's no reason they need any more than just psychological adaptation, really, because it's about management on the day, leading up to it on the day. The roadie and the marathon runner, I'd put them together in the sense that they're on their own. There's not much you can do for them. It's their physiology. So it's for the marathon runner, you're going to have to be light, big surface area, run efficiently. That's choosing the right appearance, going in nice and light and lean, running efficiently. So all of those things that, that might involve some plyometric exercise and real long-term adaptation stuff. If Tokyo, I'd figure out the vapor pressure gradients. If they know they're going to be dripping sweat, I wouldn't be doing like a 2-week heat acclimation. I'd be doing either, I don't know, this would be a guess, 4 to 6, 7 days, or months, as in get the benefits from heat acclimation you want quickly, but not a big sweat adaptation, or be there for months, or be in the heat for months and become really efficient thermal regulator. Probably the same with the road cyclist. The road cyclist can get away with, I think, they're going to want to keep their hydration up. So even if they get a wasteful sweating, it's not going to count against them as much as it will the marathoner. This is now being with practical advice, mate.
Yeah, it's hard work.
But I'm just mulling over the issues that we can't do much for the roadie or the marathon runner least. They really are on their own. They just have to move efficiently and be the right build for Tokyo. I wouldn't warm up for either. Personally, I wouldn't warm up for either event, because you're just storing unnecessary heat using carbohydrate, using thermal capacity reserve, and using water reserve that you're going to want later in the race. The roadie's going to hope that no one does a break from the get-go, but that's more the peril of the person who did the break, I think.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I'd keep the hydration up for the roadie in particular.
Clearly.
Oh, sorry. And both of them I'd be pre-cooling with the slushy, but realizing that people's perceptions of their cooling bigger than what the reality of it is, certainly for surface-based cooling. So I'd probably be doing some surface cooling as well. Personally, I wouldn't be jumping in a cold bath, just because it is really effective at cooling you down more, but then you've got renal issues and, you're starting to get rid of the fluid as well. So I'd be cooling down just with a bit of surface cooling, cold frigid towels and things like that, and the slushies for both of them. Sorry, I should have answered that more succinctly. It'd be slushies for both, and the roadie can afford to sweat more than the marathon runner, but I think partly because they can replenish more readily. The marathon runner can only deal with a certain amount of hydration. They just don't slow down enough to be able to drink well enough. Right.
And just quickly, what are you drinking? Are we drinking normal sports drink? Are we watering them down at all, or are we just doing plain water?
I mean, a sports drink's not my specialty, but you're not drinking a high enough concentration that you're limiting gastric emptying. That's a bottleneck in hydration. You really don't want that to be limiting your hydration, but gastric emptying is going to be limited by nerves and so forth. So I guess you want to be trying to keep on top of that as much as you can. But no, I wouldn't be dilating it down too much below, in the order of 6%. Again, it's not my specialty, but you're not really affecting, as far as I understand, you're not affecting gastric emptying that much at that point. So you are going to be having a higher carbohydrate need than you otherwise would. A warmer environment involves a little bit more carbohydrate reliance. But I wouldn't be modifying that too much. I'd just make sure you know what you can drink. And for example, a decent athlete out there for any length of time, the hydration will be an issue.
Yes.
You start to play around with it a bit more for some other events, but the marathon, the 50k race walk, the triathlon, and the road race, I'd be trying to make sure you got your hydration pretty well down, Pat.
And what about heat stroke? Is that a very real danger out there? Like,
Oh, I think it is, absolutely.
right, because one of the questions was, okay, I'm a pasty Brit and I haven't acclimatised, and we've just touched on that maybe acclimatising isn't the greatest thing to do anyway.
Well, I think some acclimatisation is. It's going to give them more blood volume, and for me, we just don't have enough data on this yet. There's some aspects that, even though there's hundreds of studies on heat acclimation, we have hardly any on really well-trained endurance athletes. So there's a lot about them we don't know, and it's likely it's not as effective as we'd like to think because they're already so well adapted, and this is a particularly unique environment. But that said, things like the initial week in the heat, it gives them a lot of adaptation that doesn't necessarily involve much about sweating. So they don't get big increases in sweating in the first week, but they get a lot of other adaptations that may be quite critical. And one other aspect is being really well heat acclimated, as in months of heat acclimation or heat acclimatization, as in their natural environment acclimatization. And the sense that the animal data would indicate you become more efficient, so your cellular processes become more efficient. You don't rely on such an explosive, powerful thermoregulation, but you're just more efficient. And that's the sort of thing that may make a difference in that environment. But of course, a lot of people hold down jobs and things, and it's not as if you're going to be able to heat acclimatise over that sort of time frame anyway. But the pasty Britain going, the one that you refer to going to the heat,
That's Matt Rowe.
There's no reason they can't do as well as anyone else. It's really management as much as it is about adaptation, assuming that everybody gets, for example, you 1 to maybe 2 weeks, maybe in hot environment adapting. It really does then come down to management, just putting the whole package together.
So is there any genetics involved to cope with the heat? I mean, I just know mentally myself, I was better after 10 days, a week, 10 days in the heat. I just knew kind of my brain was switched on to the heat too. I think that helped. I just knew what it felt like and I just sort of got used to it. So you just...
Yeah, sure.
Is there some people that can adapt to it better? Like, let's take, for example, genetics. We just touched on this before the show, actually. It was like, okay, we just had a Colombian win the Tour de France, a young kid, 22 years of age, lives in Bogota or just outside at 2,800 meters, I think he lives. So, and then when we hit the Alps in the Tour de France this year, I mean, he was just untouchable when he just took off. He just counter-attacked over the top of Geraint Thomas. He's his teammate. Geraint opened the first attack. His teammate, who won the Tour, he would counter-attack. And then, once they're climbing up to 2,700 metres, no one could come close to him. And I'm just wondering, how much an effect does that have? Like, he's lived it his whole life at 3,000 metres, and then he goes to race at 2,700. Everyone else is struggling like anything, and he's just seems like he was just at home.
I mean, across the board in different environments, genetics does have a role, and there's a lot of genetics involved in the sense that there's so many genetic factors underlying someone's performance that it's a matter of being lucky enough to have the perfect package for any given environment. And yeah, sure, I mean, he's growing up in that environment, and the research studies that we do just don't even touch those sort of adaptations. We look at effects of what are, most altitude training studies, what are they? 2 to 4, 5 weeks versus a lifetime. And the epigenetics, and it's clear, that there are very real genetic differences, and that applies to altitude, and it does apply to heat as well. And it's some people try and put the two together and cross one over to the other, and there's some cross adaptation, and there's no evidence yet that you can put the two together. So there are very clear genetic differences that give people an advantage, and it will be the same in the heat, and it'll be the people who generally are efficient, and that'll be partly genetics.
What do you mean by efficient? Because you've touched on that.
Efficient, so they move fast without producing so much heat, so they just move efficiently or economically. They don't use so much energy to go a given speed. It's like the mileage in your car. Except in this sense, you can think of the rate they use energy or the rate they produce heat. It amounts to the same thing.
Ah, okay.
So the people who just move efficiently. But in bike and cycling, that's more than just exercise. It's about tactics as well, which is going to be a biggie. Yeah, so I mean they'll all be factors. So again, to win in Tokyo is just putting that whole package together and not doing anything stupid. And for my mind, I mean, going out on your own and just having to do extra work seems to me like not maybe such a smart move. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not.
I don't. Yeah, but I think that's a given, because it's just a feeling. When you attack at altitude, or when you attack or sprint for the final or to go across to a move in heat, or like massive heat or altitude, you've got one bullet. And it's like, so that's where the tactics are going to be 100%. You cannot keep doing that time after time.
Yeah.
So then you just don't recover.
And the one that's actually really important is if people in the heat, one of the efficiency, and so some people will tolerate heat more than others, and we do a lot around why the brain fails in the heat. So we do a lot of cerebrovascular, the brain blood flow and how it's regulated, and why some people tolerate high brain temperatures better than others and keep the blood flow to the brain, and what effects that has. And we don't seem to be, some people just don't. You were saying before, you get in the heat and you love it after a while. Some people don't. And we find that when we heat acclimatize people, you just can't overcome that for some people. So something about their heat intolerance, they just overbreathe and they shut brain blood flow down a reasonable amount. We don't actually know, by the way, whether that's a good or a bad thing. It doesn't help their performance, but some people just are susceptible to that and some aren't. So, of course, you don't want to be one of those folk who aren't, and selection for Tokyo should surely be taking that type of thing into account for national teams. But one of the biggies is for heat stroke is not only being able to not generate so much heat that you don't heat up too fast, but don't have a prior existing illness. And that could be an illness even that's appeared to be resolved a few days earlier, but in actual fact, as far as your immune system is concerned, it hasn't. So recent febrile illness is a real, if you've had one in Tokyo, then there's someone to be really watched.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, okay. So just the last question touching on this is that we had sent in was clothing. Now, is this going to be a major factor? Because there's so much technology in clothing. I mean, it's changed so much over the last 10 years, as you know. But what, do we wear an undershirt and then our race clothing, or do you want it on your skin, or what would be optimum? What would be the optimum in this sort of environment?
I mean, I'm not specialty in that at all. But you've just got to create a film, the best film on your skin that you can, or as close to your skin as you possibly can, just to evaporate off. Just a nice uniform, anything that will give you a nice uniform sweat layer. But so not changing clothing like intent. I mean, I haven't tested this to know, but for example, I can never understand why people, once they've finally got a shirt wet and it's working well, why they then change it for a dry one. But something that just spreads the sweat on the skin, keeps it close to your skin so it evaporates and removes the heat as close off the skin as you can, or even the skin itself as much exposed as possible. And one of the things about clothing is that they test them on mannequins, and they might show that something wicks or is more vapor permeable than another one. And the trouble is, mannequins, you can show a difference of maybe 1% in a clothing characteristic that allows one garment to breathe or one fabric to breathe, maybe 1% faster than another one or more than another. And therefore it's sold as being, this new wonder fabric that has superior breathing properties. But you put that on a person and it may amount to basically nothing. And then it depends on how well it fits that person and the coverage and other things. So I think people get a little bit caught up sometimes too much in, putting too much faith in some type of clothing over another, whereas it's just part of a bigger puzzle, really. And it's so much easier necessarily not to generate that 1% of extra heat in the first place.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, just be slightly more efficient or slightly more intelligent with your moves or your selection of attacks or whatever during the road race.
Yeah. So I think, by all means, clothing's going to be an issue, and it's not, as I say, it's not something I have expertise in. But just keep it in perspective. It's not a magic bullet either.
Yeah, exactly. So the $1 million question that everybody wants to know is the Zwift ecosystem. That's your Zwift setup. Indoors, do we want a nice warm environment, not too hot, or do we want to try and keep this room as cool as possible with fans and everything on us? What's the best? So if we can win this next Zwift race that we're in,
this is just going into a hot environment. I mean, this is such a cop out. But I'd say, I mean, at the moment, periodization, there's a lot of value in just varying a stimulus. And I'd say it's not really clear whether we want a warm stimulus or a cool stimulus, and they both have value for different reasons. So I'd say do as much of both as you can. Well, I know that's a cop out, but there's things about heat. There's things about heat that are valuable. You know, it gives you more blood volume. It goes through your glycogen faster. It primes the sweat and skin blood flow responses a bit more strongly, and sometimes you want those. Not health and performance wise, a lot of these things. It gives you more total body water volume. Gets you used to being that environment, so you may be a bit more accustomed to just toughing it out, which is part of what exercise is becoming a bit more resilient to adversity. And there's times you may want to train cool and go hard, because exercise, as you know, people who are really fit, it's really heat stressful. So the colder the environment, the better. So I think you just get different things from different type of environments. Now, I don't know the best way to oscillate those, to periodize those, but I think they're both. Yeah. I think they're both valuable. Absolutely.
But a one-off race, you're going to be faster at 0 degrees than you are at 40 degrees.
Yeah. I mean, if it's long enough, if it's within 5 minutes or so, then I'd say you're probably better off in the 40.
Yes.
But if it's longer than 5, then you're going to be better off in the 0 for sure. And again, that's going to depend on, if it's a climb, then of course you can afford to go cooler than warmer. If you're really a beanpole, then you don't want to go too cool, particularly if you're going really quick.
Big surface area.
So yeah, I mean, you're trading. Everyone's got their own optimal environment. It just depends on how long and who they are.
I've noticed with a lot of the sports scientists, their favourite answer is it depends.
Yeah, so it does. I mean, we just don't, for all the studies, we don't have some answers to some really basic questions.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Professor Jim Cotter, I really appreciate your time. Just one final question. It was on everybody's lips. Out of all the students to have gone and taken your classes over the last 100 years, who's your next best prospect of being the next genius sports doctor in your opinion? Who would it be?
Who do you want me to say?
Just be honest.
I tell you what, one of the guys going through his PhD is going to go a long way, I think, in terms of this extreme environment stuff. And yeah.
Look, obviously not the answer that everybody was after. I think what you meant, everybody was. I could hear the chants going, Greg. So I'm pretty sure Doc Hendy is what they wanted you to say. It's basically written. It's basically written in the stars.
You coming back to do your next degree, are you?
Who knows? Hey, no, I really appreciate it, and
cool.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting these build-ups too, because a lot of them nowadays social media always shows how everybody's building up, everyone's preparing. So it's going to be interesting, the different nations, the different codes. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think it puts sports science more in the frame than some of the previous ones have. I mean, sports science from a technical perspective has always had a role, but from a physiological perspective, I think there's a lot, many roads lead to Rome, but this one's a bit different.
Really appreciate your time, mate.
Cool.
And we'll catch up soon.
No worries. Good to chat, Greg.
Well, there we go. Plenty more chat you had there, Greg, with Professor Jimbo. One quick thing. It's easy to use the two terms acclimation and acclimatization interchangeably. I think a lot of people would. And whilst they're both, about biological adaptations and reducing that physiological strain on your body, all about helping you increase your comfort, exercise capacity, and the like. They're actually different terms. So what is the difference in a nutshell there, Greg?
Come on, Rowe. This is your time to shine. I know you've done the study. Hit us with it.
Okay, I'll hit it. Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. So, heat acclimation is a broad term that can be loosely defined as a complex series of changes or adaptations that occur in responses to heat stress in a controlled environment. So, on the short term, maybe a week or two, you can kind of manipulate your body. So maybe jumping in a heat chamber, training in the heat. But this all kind of man-made. That would be heat acclimation, whereas acclimatization is in the natural environment. So you'd acclimatize by going to Tokyo, for example, or somewhere with conditions like Tokyo. That would be acclimatization, where acclimation you could do it from home, couldn't you? You can do it wherever.
Absolutely. Like the guys that were training for Doha Worlds were doing intervals in their bathrooms with heaters on to simulate hot environment. So that's acclimate. They're doing it at home and they're making the environment themselves, or sauna training or something like that. Acclimatization, you basically go to the country that you're going to have the extreme temperature at.
And extreme temperature, we're talking about heat here, but it could go the same way to really cold temperatures, or could it wet conditions? So take an athlete from somewhere really hot. I don't know, say you're an athlete that's from the UAE, and they were going to come and do the Worlds in Yorkshire next month. They could acclimate by training in super cool conditions. And I'm not sure about the moisture actually in the rain. You're probably going to struggle to acclimate for that, aren't you?
No, because what you do, it's what we used to do when we used to go train for Belgium. We used to put the wind trainer in the bathroom, turn the shower on cold, and put the fan on maximum. So it was like having a crosswind with a cross rain. It's the best thing to do.
Brilliant. I knew you were going to come up with something like that.
Send us the pictures when you're doing rain acclimation.
Hey, Kristin, I'm not an athlete anymore, so I don't have to subject myself to these sort of terrors anymore.
Just your chat with Professor Jim. Efficiency as well is something I picked up on, and you kind of Jim mentioned it quite a few times, and you fleshed out from Jim what it actually meant. Heat efficiency. So how efficiently you can produce power. It's basically that ratio, isn't it, between you produce a lot of power or watts on the bike for little heat generation, and that's going to be really important if you're cycling in heat, and that's all personal as well. So you're going to have someone who has a greater heat efficiency than someone else. I thought that was a really interesting point as well.
I like the fact that it's the most efficient is someone who lives in that environment, has acclimatized for 6 months in that environment. That makes you more efficient by default. So it's it's a really tricky one, and you can see that Jimbo he would never give us a definitive answer because the studies just aren't there. Like there's not enough foundation work out there to know exactly what do we do for an event that is 30 minutes long. What do we do for an event that is 6 minutes long? What do we do for an event that is 6 hours long? There's no definitive, absolute science textbook answers out there. There's just so much room for study and interpretation out there.
Yeah, and physiologically, everyone is made up so differently and unique that in order to do these things, even the differences between men and women, and when you look at women, you have to look at the different hormone levels and the time of the month and whether or not they are menstruating or not. I mean, the cycle even is a determinant on how their baseline core temperature is. And so there's just so many variables in these studies and so much more work to be done.
That is one thing we can manipulate though, isn't it? We can actually manipulate the starting set point of your core temperature. So, if you're 37.6 degrees, we can manipulate that to where we do start at 36 degrees. And, critical failure kind of happens around 41. I know a lot of marathon runners and tests can get their core temperature up to 41 and still perform, but that's at the top end of elite athletes. Anything above that temperature, you're really going to struggle. So things like an ice slushy, a cooling vest, it can actually start your set point lower, and then it does take time for your core temperature to then even begin to raise. And then when it does raise a little more slowly than what it would if you hadn't pre-cooled and acclimatized to that kind of condition.
Yeah, and obviously some people just don't acclimatize to the heat as well. Obviously for nations selected, they're going to really have to get into some of this detail because, you have riders who perform really well in Europe and have a great season, but Little do we know, they're just no good in the superhuman conditions. And unless you know that, nations are going to end up selecting and taking potentially the wrong riders. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating for the Olympics.
And the other really interesting thing is the more muscular you are, you would think, and the leaner you are, the more you're actually going to suffer at heat, because more muscles, less fat, your muscles produce heat. That's what actually is your main heat driver, is your muscles contracting. So the more muscular you are, the more you suffer at heat as well. So it's so many factors when it comes to dealing with heat, and then you add humidity on top of that. You've just got, like we discussed with Professor Jim, is you're going to have an athlete win quite a few of the titles or quite a few of the gold medals on doing particular research and accurate research on how to perform at their specific event in Tokyo in those conditions.
Yeah, we so often just focus on the physical part of things, and once again, just really getting into that 1% of what can we do to dive into and what do we have access to learn more about each of these athletes that are medal potential in Tokyo, and just generally into the general person who is going and going to face a large event they've been training for months, and they're going to have a hot, humid condition. It's really looking at what do you have access to? Can you do some pre-cooling? Are there things that you can do leading up to that event to help your base core temperature be lower, but also not only physiologically, but psychologically, how can you become more confident in these conditions? And so really just asking yourself, what do you have access to and how can you be your best? Because I always like to say, you got to control your controllables, and there are little things that each of us can do no matter what it is. And it's as basic as wearing more clothes sometimes during your training to get that feeling and to begin to do some of the acclimation that we all have access to.
And on that point of looking at yourself, what you can do, I mean, off the back of your chat there, Greg, the one thing I'm going to do is when I'm sweating, don't wipe the sweat off with a towel. Just let yourself sweat, because to the point that you made, sweat that drips on the floor is wasted, and it's worse than not sweating. You need that sweat to be removed. You need that sweat to evaporate, and that is how you lose your heat. And there were kind of stats in, I think it's kilojoules per gram of, I can't remember what it was, but basically there's, unless the sweat is on your body, it ain't going to evaporate and you're not going to lose heat. So if you're on Zwift and you are sweating, then leave the sweat on your body. Don't reach for the towel like most of us probably do. That's going to have completely the adverse effect.
I got a funny story about my first time competing in Malaysia, which is obviously very warm and very humid also. And it was a teammate of mine. I was just a young kid. It was the Commonwealth Games in 1998, and we jumped on the bus heading to the village. And I look over at him. I said, "Mate, this is just ridiculous, this heat." And he goes, "You know what, Hendy? You've just got to be one with the sweat dribbling down your cracks." And so all of a sudden, he just ripped his clothes off, and he ripped his pants off, and he's just sitting there in the nutty, just sweating. Look, obviously, I don't recommend this as an acclimation technique, but geez, I got a laugh out of it.
God, character.
Oh, he's...
you Kiwis, eh? You Kiwis. What
yeah,
you like?
Kiwis love to get their kid off, don't they?
Quality. Cool. I think that's going to wrap up our chat with Jim. It's pretty insightful, and don't be afraid of kind of stopping, pausing the chat, and kind of going back and rewinding. I certainly did that a good few times. So if you've got to do that to kind of digest and get to the bottom of what Jim and Greg spoke about, then do it. Next section, we normally talk about a Zwift session, but we're going to switch it up slightly, and we're going to kind of call this our community story section. So this is a new section where we just share some of the cool stories that are happening amongst the Zwift community, because there's so much of it. It'd be a shame to not acknowledge it and kind of bottle it up. So a shout out to Trisha Cobb, who missed a whole year of cycling due to cancer treatment. But last weekend, she was able to complete a metric century, so 1,000 kilometers on Zwift. So obviously fantastic to hear. I think that's Zwift at its finest. Onwards and upwards, Trisha. I think she's obviously super motivated now to train for her next event with her husband. So I think a bit of advice there after listening to Professor Jim, Trisha, is keep cool.
Yeah, it was a fantastic story, wasn't it? And it just shows the benefits of a fantastic Zwift community. You know, every time you get on for a group ride or a race, there's always some chat or always some friends on there. It's always someone you know. Yeah, the Zwift community inspires and just drives you just to ride that little bit further. It's fantastic.
Definitely. And just think about for Trisha, have you got any advice you can share with her? Or she's just getting back into it. She's going to be super keen to push yourself hard. Obviously, got a health back. But I was thinking, just don't be afraid to rest. You know, you've had this huge rise to form, but we all get tired and all have dips. So just stay strong. I guess keep doing what you're doing, but yeah, make sure you're not kind of overdoing it, I guess would be my my initial thinking.
Yeah, I would say that's great advice. I think that sometimes we can get overzealous and dig ourselves into fatigue. But I would continue to use the Swift community to support you. It's empowering, and set new goals, set more goals. I think that we're all driven by having something that we're working towards. And so good job in setting a goal and accomplishing it.
There we go. Good job, Tricia. Moving on then, cycling terminology. So I've got a term for you, Kristin. Greg, you all right to get on the clock?
Righto, mate. I've got the clock ready.
Good man. All right, Kristin, you've got 30 seconds to explain the term crossing the chain.
Crossing the chain. I am all too familiar with crossing the chain because it happened to me after 12 years of racing my bike. Okay, so crossing the chain is basically when you take your chain over that midline between that front chain ring and that rear cog. So, for example, you're going to have a big front chain ring to the biggest rear cog. Or, for example, on the opposite spectrum, you'd have small front chain ring to the smallest rear cassette cog. That is crossing the chain.
That's your 30 seconds, Kristin. We need to speed up those explanations.
Brutal.
That 30 seconds goes very fast.
Bam.
I got it though. One of those. You see people riding along, and it's obviously the chain's rubbing on their front mech. And you're thinking, mate, can you not hear that noise?
Well, the problem now is that there's so many gears to choose from that they're promoting cross-chaining. It just happens. It just happens.
I don't really have that problem because I'm just always hunkered down in the 5311 because I'm so strong.
Sure you are.
You live in the little ring, Greg. Don't pretend.
I live in the little ring. I took the big chain ring off.
And you're not going up climbs. You're just staying flat. That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. Mike lent up outside the cafe in the little ring. We know the score.
Oh, you ride a fixie. Yes.
Yeah.
We understand. Yeah. Okay.
I think it's one of those you almost kind of get. It's just being lazy. I think with the gear changes sometimes. You know, because even though left and right, it's still just a finger movement. I guess the sensations of going from little ring to big ring, more of a extreme change, let's call it. I'm clutching at straws here, trying to justify why people do it. But there's really no reason to. I mean, just always be in the right gear, because not only is it it can make a noise and rub your front mech, but also inefficiency. That's not efficiency. Your chain's running at that tight angle. Yeah, don't cross chain.
100% that. It's wasted watts. I always think that. It's like, if you hear that noise or you're crossing, your big chain ring and you're way too far up the block, it's like, this is not the efficient way to run a chain. You're losing watts. So I was always aware of that.
Yeah, for me, it was always more of a forceful situation where I'm transitioning in a time trial from going super, super fast downhill into a 180-degree turn up a hill. And so it would, all of a sudden, I'd be cross-chaining and I would have to drop to that small chain ring, and well, that was that. And so I think for me, it was more under pressure in times that I was trying to push and force, and it's not a good combo.
Yeah. And I guess those on a time trial bike, when you're coming up, taking your example, you come into a climb or big descent, going really quick in the big ring, obviously, and the small sprocket. Then you're going up a climb and you can see the top of the climb, you're nearing the top of it, and you're thinking, I should probably, change into my little ring, but the top's only 200 meters away, so I don't want to do it because that's going to force me to do 2 front mech changes. Yeah, inefficient. So yeah, because there's definitely examples where you should. It's just when you see someone riding on the flat, and they're in their big ring and like the 25 sprocket at the back cruising along, that's a big no-no. Anyway, enough about crossing the chain. Quick fire question then, Greg. I think you've come up with one for us this week.
Yeah, so I've got a question to ask you guys, and obviously our listeners, is, are you an early morning Zwifter or are you a late night Zwifter?
Early morning.
Early morning.
I'm an afternoon, late night Zwifter.
Is that because you had a late night the night before Just getting up late, or
no. I all of a sudden I fill my day, and then I take a group ride on a Thursday night called the Kiwi Crew Ride. So I've just sort of got now into a routine where riding in the afternoon or the evening is become quite enjoyable, and I've got a few groups that I meet up with, and it's just something that because I always used to train obviously in the morning when I was a professional, but now I do my study or I do my school or whatever I do in the mornings, and then in the afternoon or evening I jump on Zwift.
Matt, really what he's trying to say is he's trying to ride when you ride.
yeah, can't blame him. And for me, I just want to get it done, and I think the pressure, once I've got up and I train, the pressure's off. Versus running the risk of your day running away with you, and you get stuck doing what you're doing with work, something coming up. You know how it is. A mate suggests go for a pint after work, and certainly on a Friday. I think if you get your session done in the morning, then you can obviously get more rest until your weekend ride. So obviously Saturday, well, for me anyway, and I think Brits are typically Saturday, Sunday are your big group rides. So if you're training on Friday evening and then Saturday morning, you haven't got much time to obviously recover.
Yeah, for me, it's always when I wake up, if I can get a ride in, it just makes my day that much better. And if I get off of work and I have time to get another ride in, then it's just bonus.
Bonus.
Damn. Double sessions. Boom.
And then 2 days off. Double session, 2 day off. It's kind of the best way to go.
There you go. Once an athlete, always an athlete. Look.
You got to earn your time off.
Absolutely. Cool. Questions then. We've got two questions this week. 2 questions. So first question is from Adrian Bissenden. And Adrian's question reads, it's quite long, so I'll read it all out. Hey, thanks for the podcast. It's amazing training information. I'm a busy father, recently switching from ultra-distance trail running to focusing more on cycling. I've built a big base on running long distances, so I have a high aerobic capacity. My question is, I can only get my heart rate to hit 150 beats per minute and above on the bike when I start holding 250 watts and increasing from there. My legs fail me through trying to hold that wattage because I have not built a cycling base. How do I best train my muscular endurance in my legs to hold higher wattages for long periods of time so I can keep an elevated heart rate above 150 beats per minute without my legs blowing up? Cheers. What do you make of that one then, Greg?
Yeah, so really interesting because we sort of touched on it a little bit with Professor Jim, and it comes down to efficiency of riding a bike. And I actually have this very similar pattern when I run, because I run every Saturday. And the same thing, I'm so inefficient at running that I can't produce a high heart rate, or I can't hold a high pace for a long time because I don't have the muscular capacity to run fast for a long time. So he's got the same thing in a cycling related incident. And really, the thing that will change this is just time on the bike. You become more efficient at pedaling. You become more efficient at holding those higher watts. It's just going to be some time. One thing I would try is just little spikes of 30 to 40 seconds of high power, maybe that 300 or 400 wattage or within 150 to 160% of your FTP. Spikes like this, and then, a minute and a half of normal riding. But if you can just actually adapt and get your muscles to adapt to the force being produced over and above your threshold, you will eventually adapt to these threshold powers. And honestly, it's just the amount of time that you spend on the bike, the more efficient that you can do a pedaling circle. For example, when I ride on the ergo, I can easily get my heart rate to 195 heart rate because I'm so efficient. I can incorporate every single muscle in my lower limb I engage. But when I run, I'm so efficient. I look like a bulldog chewing a wasp when I'm running, and and it's so inefficient, and I'm just not going fast forward, and my heart rate just is the same thing. It just won't go up because I'm not producing force efficiently. So just take your time, do some intervals where you're actually producing a lot of force for a short amount of time, and your muscles will adapt to it eventually.
Makes sense. And for me, I think the first thing you said was just spend time on the bike. It's almost, for Adrian, going from being a bike rider, turning him into a cyclist. Just getting used to being sat on a bike and turn those pedals around circles, as you say.
You mean from an ultra distance runner to a cyclist?
Yeah, I mean, even from A bike rider. I mean, I always say there's a difference between a bike rider or someone who rides a bike and a cyclist. Like someone who rides a bike, has got a bike and rides very, very occasionally, and whereas a cyclist is what we define as someone who's fairly serious and trains. But yeah, she's basically gone from being an ultra distance runner to being someone who rides a bike, but now he needs to go to becoming a cyclist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does, yep.
There you go, Adrian. Well, hope that helps anyway. Question 2 is from Kinsey Harris. Again, both the questions were sent in via Facebook. And Kinsey's question reads, I have self-coached myself using Zwift for plenty of my riding. I have a periodized training plan and have recovery weeks scheduled in 2 weeks, but this week I've been ill and taken the whole week off. I feel that another easy week in 2 weeks would be too much time off training. What do you guys think? Thanks in advance, Kinsey. So I like this question. It's a good question, and it's definitely an area, illness and injury is definitely an area where some reassurance is handy. When you can't train, you have more time to think and your mind can run wild. So being confident in your approach by getting a second opinion is definitely a good idea, I think. So Kinsey, he's just been ill, had a week of no riding, and he's just about to get training again. But in a week's time, you've kind of scheduled an easy recovery week. I think first off, the last week when you've been ill, whilst you haven't trained, has not been a recovery week. I mean, your body's still been working hard, no doubt, to repair itself and fight whatever infection you've had as its priority. So you'll likely feel less refreshed now after a week of being ill than before you got ill when you were fatigued from training. But that said, in a 3-week period, you wouldn't want to have 2 weeks off or kind of be really easy. And we work in weeks and talk in terms of training blocks being X number of weeks purely for convenience. It fits people's lifestyles. However, a recovery phase doesn't need to be a week. It can be a month at the end of the season, or it can be 2 or 3 days. So my advice here is get back into training now, presumably you're healthy, and then just take 3 days off instead of the full week. So that's going to give you 10 or 11 days training, then take your 3 days off, and that should hopefully leave you raring to go at the start of another training phase. I think it's important that in the next 10, 11 days, you don't go straight into doing any top-end work straight away. Look at spending a bit of time doing some aerobic stuff. It's giving your body a chance to really ensure that whatever illness you've had is properly out of your system. And I think this is the difference really between a kind of a coach and a training plan. Training plans are static, but coaching or the advice and guidance help you to extract the real value from a good training plan. But you know what? I think in reality, most of us need downtime mainly to benefit the mind. And I think physically we can often crack on, but it's our head that goes, our motivation drops, perhaps we're not as committed and don't train as hard. Because for amateurs, if you're training 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a week, physically you probably don't need a rest all year round. What do you reckon?
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. Because all fatigue is neural. If we go and take the physiological side of it, you can't actually fatigue yourself to complete exhaustion. Your brain won't let you do it. So if you did, you would run out of ATP and you would seize and you go into rigor mortis. So physically and physiologically, you're not fatigued. It is that mental break that you're talking about, and it's so important. And it happens at every level of sport, from the sportive rider, from the beginner, right up through to being Kristin Armstrong, training for the Olympic Games and winning gold medals. It's the level of mental capacity it's limited, and your brain has to be fresh. It's just don't panic, take the rest and enjoy the rest, I reckon, and get back into it when you can.
Yeah, I think it's always hard. We always second guess ourselves until we've gone through a certain situation ourselves to realize, unfortunately, sometimes it does take being sick or having a setback, an injury, to make you realize that, wow, you do come back really quickly in that mental break. If you wouldn't have gotten sick or you wouldn't have had that injury or setback, sometimes you wonder, wow, would I have won that race or would I have done well at that race if I didn't have that break? And so to trust that break is always really, really hard, because when you are an endurance athlete and, well, an athlete of any type. I mean, even I know some athletes who are really into just strength training, and we become very addicted to that endorphin, that feel, that high we get from working out. So we always want to drive. But the benefits of rest and the benefits of just taking a step back for the mental side itself are just so powerful.
It's so nice having a coach that you can really trust in and believe in too, like Kristin touched on, has been through that scenario, that knows, yes, the rest is going to be good for you, and yes, you are going to come back stronger. So you're not panicking during this time off. You just know, right, this has happened, this is where I am right now, and I will come back. There's no question. And it's just nice to have that reassurance.
If amateur cyclists who, cycling's a relatively small part of their life. When you're ill or you can't train through injury, you still got lots of other stuff going on, like a job to keep you occupied. But interested, for you guys, you must have both had times where you're a full-time athlete and it's kind of like such a huge part of your life, yet you can't do it. And how did you guys cope? And was there anything you did specifically to keep your mind occupied so you didn't go stir crazy when you couldn't train?
That's a really good point. And like the amateur that does have a full-time job, it does keep their brain happy, because that is part of it as an athlete. They say, an athlete doesn't work a full-time job, but when I was a professional, it was like, how did my training session go? What's my next training session? Go and do the training session. You go to bed thinking about your next training session and how you performed in your last training session. So you never shut off from cycling. So then all of a sudden you take out 5 hours of your day where you can't actually exercise. It became down to one of those factors where you controlled the controllables. Okay, what can I do now? Okay, I can really work on my core. I can work on my diet. There are things I can still control when I'm injured or when I'm sick. So I'd really put a lot of focus into those things.
It's still very focused on that performance side of things. I mean, it's for some people that's going to be so all-encompassing, where I don't know, reading a book or watching films, or there's only so much of that you can do, isn't there? Like you're awake for maybe 16 hours of the day. I'm trying to think, what could you do to fill your time? Because even paying more attention to your profession, good move, but still it's not going to take your mind off things and distract you, or did it for you?
I guess maybe again it comes down to experience, knowing I've been in this situation before and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And of course, I had a young family, so it was always great to spend more time with them. So there was actually definite positives to having an injury or time off, because there's other parts of your life you can explore.
Yeah, being a female cyclist is a little bit different than being obviously male for a number of reasons. But when we talk about the balance and the amount of training I did per week, it was significantly less than I would say a pro tour rider. And so I actually always made it part of, my career. I always had a part-time job, and it was something that I did not just for money. I did it because I wanted the balance, exactly what we're talking about. Because when I would go work, I was on this Olympic program through like Home Depot in America, where they would work with Olympic athletes, and you could come in depending on your training schedule. And what it did for me is you walk into an environment where you're working in like a hardware store, and nobody is asking you about like, how did your training go today? Nobody really cares. In fact, sometimes they would come to me and say, oh my gosh, Kristin, you were not going to believe it. I went out and walked my dog today. And so you get into a very normal life environment, and it really just sort of took up that rest of the time. It was prior to having a child, and it really created balance. And what it did for me was it made me realize that it wasn't just all about how my day went. It was about providing customer service, is about being in an environment that was very different than what I was used to. And it really helped me grow as a person. And it also helped the transition from when I did eventually retire to getting work and being an entrepreneur. So I think there's a lot of benefits. But again, I was a female cyclist who could do this because the training demands are just a little bit less. You have a little bit more time in the day. And then also just the 2 periods I had of rest. I took 2 years off after Beijing, and I took 2 years off after London before Rio. And people are like, well, how did you do that and come back? And I always say to people, that was my secret weapon was I gave myself 2 years of pretty much a mental break. People always said that you're done, you're ready to retire when your mind can't push like it can push any longer. It's not physiologically that you're going to decline so much you can't actually go compete. It's saying your mind just can't do it again. And without those 2 years off after those 2 Olympics, I don't think I could have come back. Those 4 years after 4 years after 4 years, it's hard on the mind.
God, that's fascinating. Working in a hardware store. Amazing.
Home Depot,
Home
baby.
Depot. I was in the paint department if you wanted to really know. Yeah.
Amazing.
My husband
That's
always
cool.
say, have you ever picked up a paintbrush in your life and you're teaching people how to paint? I go, oh yeah, I'm the person who's patient and helping them pick colors out.
That's unbelievable. Awesome. All right, guys. As always, good to chat. I think, obviously we're gonna have Kev back on the next podcast. He's obviously wrapped up in Tour de France and different bits and pieces, so it'll be good to hear, what he's been up to. So, Greg, Kristin, catch up with you soon.
Hey, cheers, guys. I'm off to school now, so wish me luck with the young kids, and we'll catch you soon.
Great. Have a great week.